policies within states and between states, create a robust, clear transparency framework and maintain accessibility and affordability of low carbon and clean energy sources. So the ICC continued to draw on the expertise of its global members. I think Sandra said 45 million companies globally in 170 countries to draw on that experience and develop its revised core principles, carbon pricing principles and guidance in 2021. And they're available on the website, open to all. In 2022, for the COP27, the ICC issued a second report drawing out more design features and case studies, putting those carbon pricing principles into practice in 2023. In its third report issued in Dubai, it provided further guidance to governments and policymakers to address carbon leakage, promote linkage for greater international cooperation, and make carbon pricing systems more efficient. We're hoping to launch a graphic that encapsulates all of that. Andreas and I were just looking at it on my laptop with a comprehensive but also very, very clear demonstrative of the interconnectivity between carbon pricing compliance mechanisms and the all-important to us Article 6. And voluntary markets. So as the UNFCCC and this multinational negotiating process sends, one of its great objectives is to send signals to governments, to policymakers, to legislators, but also send signals to markets. And a strong Article 6 architecture, 6.2 and 6.4, but also 6.8 architecture will only enhance and enable the success of more effective carbon pricing mechanisms at domestic national law level, but also the success of the voluntary carbon markets. So hang in there.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you for being here and providing the remarks from the business constituency. And thank you also, Andrea, for being here and kind of representing the Secretariat. You are the global lead for regional collaboration centers, so of course, play a very crucial role, especially in capacity building in the different regions you're active. So please give us your opening remarks and maybe your views on the importance of Article 6 and how we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. The collaboration we have with Nigeria is one post-collaboration in the region we are proud of because they move really long way towards implementation of carbon pricing instruments in their country with engagement in the Article 6 collaborative approach. You may know that since Glasgow, the Secretariat received party mandates to provide capacity building support to countries when it comes to Article 6, and it does that through the 6 regional collaboration centers. One of that is a place in Lomé, covering West Africa and Central Asia, and this is the center where the government of Nigeria is collaborating with since some years now. And as I said, Nigeria showed remarkable leadership in implementing, in engaging the Article 6 framework and in matching efforts on Article 6 with carbon pricing instruments. Not only also considering Article 6 as a additional way of mobilizing finance and resources for the implementation of their NDCs. In April 2024, Nigeria submitted the long-term low emission development strategy, is also already embarking in the development of NDC 3.0. They started last month and they plan to submit it next year. And together with the NDC partnership, they have already developed an NDC implementation framework for 2023-2030. So as you see, they pretty much engage in showing a good example also for countries in the region, not only in the region, I would say globally, because it's one of the few countries that globally is considering matching, as I said, Article 6 and carbon pricing instruments. We are supporting them through the SIACA project, which is a project run by the Secretariat, which the acronym stands for Collaborative Instruments for Ambitious Climate Action, and we provide support to Nigeria for a study on feasible carbon pricing instruments for Nigeria's economy, and they're now working designing a pilot on piloting a carbon tax in the country's oil and gas sector. as I said, Nigeria is one of the very few countries, I would say globally, exploring such a combination of market approaches and to achieve emission reduction, including carbon pricing in Article 6, and this serves as a good example. And is a journey that, of course, is requiring adhering to standards, clarity and transparency, compliance mechanisms governing these markets, and we are ready then to provide support. So the system is really complex, but Secretariat stand ready to continue this collaboration, not only with Nigeria, but also with other neighboring countries and globally all the developing countries on the planet. And one additional things worth mentioning is Nigeria has rolled back fuel subsidies in May 2023, which is consistent with the call of the GST1 to phase out inefficient fuel subsidy SAP. So this is another, for an economy like Nigeria, which is heavily reliant on fossil fuel, I think this marks an important step for the country in transitioning from fossil fuel in a just, orderly and equitable manner as requested by the global stocktake. So as we move forward, let's remember that is a collective action that we are dealing with. The journey ahead is challenging, but with determination, collaboration, we can achieve our climate goals and ensure a sustainable future for all. We stand as Secretariat and regional collaboration centers to support your efforts and to facilitate exchanges, share of best practices in the region. And with that, I close my statement, but I wish you really a fruitful and successful discussion during this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And we know you have to run to another meeting, so please give a warm round of applause to our opening speakers. I think this really helped to set the scene for the conversation we are having here today. Of course, we are looking at Nigeria as one of the case studies of the Article 6 framework and moving ahead with market-based approaches. But then we'll have also a panel to look more widely on different approaches that exist and how can we work together to invest in these kind of projects. And so to dive a little bit deeper into the framework and what has been happening and developing in Nigeria for the last year or so, we have Yuan Nylander, who is a senior consultant, principal consultant, I should say, at NEYEN, who has been working very closely with the government to develop this framework. And now I see myself on the screen. Well, so Yuan, you will have your slides. Thank you for being here. Please share with us your experiences and working in Nigeria and the market framework. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, this one seems to be on as well. Thank you, Björn, very much for those introductory words. My name is Yuan Nylander. I'm working with NEYEN Consulting, and we've been happy to develop the framework for Nigeria, which is, I should say, it's still under development. I would like just to give you an idea of what this is about and why countries need these types of frameworks. So next slide, please. Yes. Why does a country like Nigeria need a carbon market framework? Well, some of the answers are obvious. Article 6 has quite high demands on host countries to prepare for participation in Article 6 markets. So compared to Kyoto Protocol and the CDM, the requirements for institutional arrangements, for implementation procedures, and including, of course, that the countries now have NDCs, calls for a very different setup than was possible under the CDM. So that's the first key message here, that to deal with this, any country engaging in Article 6 needs an institutional, policy, regulatory framework. Next slide, please. considering to develop a framework, of course, needs consideration of what are the benefits of participating. And we think here that participation in Article 6 can contribute to enhancing mitigation efforts across various sectors. It can contribute to sustainable development. It can facilitate technology transfer. It can strengthen international relations, for instance, through bilateral agreements with the trading partners. It can generate revenues. It can also share mitigation outcomes, so it helps Nigeria to implement and achieve its NDC. But then to gain these benefits, then you need to have rules of the game and procedures and processes in place so that you ensure that these are the positive benefits you get. Next slide. And there are, of course, risks that are risks of participation in Article 6, and there are also risks of not having a good or solid, robust framework. One of the things that the framework needs to address is to ensure that Nigeria is not exporting mitigation outcomes that it would need for achieving its NDC. So that's a key thing. A risk of developing a framework is that you take on management and infrastructure costs that will be difficult to cover. So a framework needs to be efficient, cost-effective, and not bring an additional burden in terms of implementation. Dealing with carbon markets, as I'm sure all of you know, means that you can host bad projects, you can participate in bad projects. So how can you use the framework to ensure that you don't host bad projects and maybe get some kind of bad reputation because of that? The risk of not having a robust national carbon market framework is that you may lose out on international opportunities because project developers, your bilateral sovereign buying partners will look for transparency, certainty, and trust in those national frameworks with they are going to engage. So that's an important role of this framework to signal this trust to other to potential buyers and project developers. Another risk is, of course, that you host projects that do not provide the expected benefits and maybe cause harm. So can you use this framework to reduce that risk? That is something that stakeholders often raise in their comments to framework development. Next slide. Very briefly, we cannot go deep into the developments of the framework. I know I have maybe just one minute left, but when we look at this, we typically see, and this depends very much on the legal and the administrative tradition of the country, how to set this up. But you need to have strong legal text. In addition to that, it is useful to have a policy framework, institutional framework that tells that these are the institutions involved, and this is how we're going to work with Article 6. So that is like a clear. You can almost think of it like a white paper. The government is telling this is how we're going to do. This is how we're going to work with Article 6. But in addition to that, it's also important to have the details outlined in implementation procedures so that every actor involved knows the responsibilities, where to go for information, where to go for templates, where to submit information, how long time will it take, who is responsible for taking decisions, etc. So next slide, please. So that means that we have suggested and often work with 2 parts of a framework. one policy institutional regulatory framework on the one hand, and on the other hand, a manual of procedures or operations manual. And the idea here is that you have one document that is more policy-based and that you don't need to change regularly. Of course, it needs to change if you have a new government, etc. But if you need to make changes, for instance, due to changes in international practice, or you will get new rules coming out of this meeting, then you may need to change some of the details in the processes. So the idea is that you change that in the manual of procedures. You don't need to change that in the policy document. So that's also why we, in this case, for Nigeria, have supported them to have one framework document and one manual of procedures. Next slide, please. I'm almost done. Very briefly, the framework is important for several different actors. So you have government institutions, and they need to know themselves what to do. So a framework document and a manual of procedures help to create the sort of the sustainability or the institutionalization of processes. So the governments have clear rules for themselves what to do, and it also helps them to align with other policies and regulations. Obviously, project developers need to have clear guidelines for how to implement their activities. As I mentioned before, creating trust for the international community is another thing, and not least also the transparency and access of information for the society as a whole and for local communities, etc. And to see where in these processes are the opportunities for consultations and for us to provide our inputs to what is happening. Finally, a large part of developing a framework and working with a country like Nigeria is the capacity building part. So this is a key for several types of actors to understand what this is about and fully understand both the policy, institutional aspects, but also that some of the devils are in the details, and understand also the implementations procedures. Next slide, please. And in Nigeria, which I will finalize by commending Nigeria for having successful framework consultations with a substantial turnout of people from different organizations, ministries, SEOs, and not least the private sector. So finally, very grateful for being able to work with Nigeria on this, and I hope we've managed to convey some of the experiences from our work. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Johan. I think this is really helpful to see not just what has been done in Nigeria, but also how can we take these learnings and apply in other countries and other jurisdictions. And I think a lot of what you have shown is actually applicable to most host countries. Okay. So thank you so much for that. And of course, one of the sponsors, as I understand, behind this framework is here on the screen, and that's UNDP. So I'm very grateful that we have a representative from UNDP, Ms. Claudia Ortiz, who is a climate change strategy specialist at UNDP, to give some brief remarks regarding the collaboration with Nigeria and your important work. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's on. Okay. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor for me to be able to represent UNDP in this very pivotal event that marks a significant milestone in Nigeria's journey towards a low carbon economy. Firstly, I extend my congratulations to Nigeria, especially the National Council on Climate Change, for its exemplary leadership and vision, establishing a framework for carbon markets, as we just saw, and detailing the engagement process for both public and private sectors is a crucial step. It sends a clear message to partners that Nigeria is ready to embrace this transition and provides clarity on the roles of various stakeholders and ensures that transactions not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also benefit the Nigerian people. The demand for creating an enabling environment to harness this source of financing is particularly high in Africa. So in UNDP, through our Global Climate Promise Initiative, we're proud to support this endeavor. We assist countries in gaining a comprehensive understanding of carbon markets, in exploring various opportunities and challenges, and assessing the impact of their national determined contributions, their NDCs, and making informed decisions. Additionally, we also facilitate the ITMO transactions between countries and offer implementation support for the voluntary carbon market. We're a development partner, not quite a sponsor, but development partner. Central to our support is the principle of high integrity as well. We've developed a high integrity carbon markets initiative. And our approach to carbon markets extends beyond carbon accounting to include social and environmental safeguards, ensuring that carbon market initiatives do no harm and promote positive sustainable development impacts. We are honored that Nigeria has embraced our support. This recent achievement adds to the long-standing partnership between UNDP and the Nigerian government on climate action. Our collaboration includes an assessment of investment and financial flows, the NDC investment plan, the revision of the latest NDC, ongoing work on water management and subnational level, the upcoming biennial transparency report, the first for Nigeria, and a rich portfolio of GEF and Green Climate Fund funded projects that contribute to the implementation of adaptation and mitigation targets in the NDC. As we move forward in operationalizing this carbon market framework, we will also support the establishment of a carbon registry in Nigeria. So lastly, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the NAYEN team for their technical support and adhering to a tight timeline while ensuring an inclusive process. And we look forward to the next chapter. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and thank you for being here at this event and for supporting Nigeria and many other countries around the globe. I think we need to really also from the AITA and private sector perspective, we need to work together, because what is most challenging for both private sector and I think host countries at this stage is the uncertainty around the rules, around the frameworks that exists. And if we can all kind of find the best practice and common ground in setting up, then we will all be able to scale up Article 6 more effectively and help the transition, especially in developing countries like Nigeria. So thank you so much. And now we are moving into our panel discussion. So I'm very happy that we have very distinguished representatives here today. First of all, I would like to welcome Michael Evenso from Nigeria himself, who is the director. Yeah, please, warm round of applause. He's the Director of Energy, Transportation and Infrastructure at the National Council on Climate Change. Yeah, please feel free to move. I will move one more. We have Hannah Choaju, who is the Head of Government Relations at Rabobank. David Newell, who is the Senior Policy Advisor at the Government of Sweden. We have Pedro Andrade de Costa de Carvalho, sorry. My Spanish is not Portuguese, sorry. Head of Policy and Markets, Eco-Securities. I'm based in Asia, so that's my excuse. And myself, I'm the moderator. No. Here is perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And let's dive into this. Huh? We have, I think, many questions. First of all, of course, starting with you, maybe, Michael, from Nigeria's point of view. We have just seen this presentation by Yuan about your Article 6 framework. So where do you, as a country, see the key opportunities for Article 6 to really help to drive transformative climate action in Nigeria?
Firstly, thank you very much from the Nigerian government on behalf of the NDA, as well as the National Focal Point for the UNFCCC, who's overseeing this entire initiative, to our very important partners at the UNDP. We're really grateful for the long-standing relationship between the government of Nigeria and the UNDP. NAYEN has been really instrumental in helping to really operationalize this Article 6 framework. So we thank them for the very hard work, and like Claudia has said, very strong timelines, but ensuring that real quality engagement, as well as adherence to very important national objectives that really exemplifies a whole of society approach and consultation in terms of what the outcome will be. And our partners at the ICC, thank you very much, Wendy. Your intervention was very timely, really highlighting the very, very importance of sustainability-linked financing to help to meet some of these very important national ambitions as expressed in the NDCs. And we have our partners at the Nigeria National Council on Climate Change and everyone else. Really, talking about where we see this, right? I think for us, a country of 240 million people, just imagine that number and what needs to be done to move that number from a fossil dependency to one that's really looking towards a net zero future in 2060. And so now for us, we've expressed our ambitions using the NDC, but where that conflicts with the framework is the carbon markets really in helping to help meet those ambitions. Now, take for example, the outcome of the GST from COP28, where we've now been asked collectively as part of our global commitments to move away from fossil fuel, number one, and then triple the uptake of renewable energy. Now, if you now imagine the amount of opportunity that exists from moving from fossil to renewable energy, think about transportation, industries, facilities on home systems, and what have you. The energy gap in Nigeria is, somewhere around 70%. And so for 240 million people, that gap needs to be filled. That represents opportunity. Some people see that as a challenge, but that's an opportunity for us to be able to really, engage with the rest of our development partners all over the world, and bring in the required financing to help make that transition. And as a country, the UNDP representative clearly articulated why the President, Mr. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, once he was sworn in as president, removed that very unreliable and very unsuccessful fuel subsidy that has been subsisted for more than 20 years. And now what that means is that Nigeria really, from the highest levels, is committed to that low carbon transition. But then, if you look at the risks associated with that, in terms of what will happen to all those assets that we have as a fossil export dependent country, that means that we now begin to have to evolve policies and regulations to support implementation on ground. Making sure that those men and women that really need these services actually have them at an affordable and easily accessible methods. So in addition to that, what we have done in Nigeria is to also remove import tariffs and VAT, for those of you who understand that, on renewable energy goods and services, meaning we are trying to lower the barrier to entry, which is always the cost, making it affordable for everyone. Meaning that now, if you have 240 million people looking to acquire renewable energy goods and services, then there is opportunity for that to come. So expressing that commitment in helping to drive the financing required to meet that gap is the carbon market. And that's exactly why we're here, really speaking to potential partners and looking at opportunities for making this very important bilateral relationships that helps to bring that forward. Now, I've spoken a lot about energy, but it's important to also amplify that Nigeria's climate response mechanisms are hinged on 3 pillars. One is climate smart agriculture. 2 is adaptation, capacity to respond to extreme weather events, as well as building resilience in the communities and institutions to respond as well. And then of course, energy transition. But in doing so, that means that we have to also look at opportunities for financing agriculture and land-based interventions across the different sectors, talking about climate smart agriculture, looking at opportunities for reducing emissions in the waste sector as well. So imagine amount of waste that 240 million people are going to generate. So how do we repurpose all of that to become something that can be translated into on-ground interventions that actually both additional and they're also meeting the needs of the people, especially those who can help themselves, all in the interest of just transition. You have to make it affordable, you have to make it available, to the very lowest denomination. So the carbon markets framework really, talks about how we as a country are identifying those opportunities that are inherent in agriculture, in waste, and other sectors that really speaks to that. I have a lot to talk about, but I know I don't know how much time I do have. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that the metric speaks for itself in terms of how much opportunities are there available in the country and how much deficit we have in terms of moving from where we are today to where we need to be tomorrow by the year 2040, by the year 2060, when our net zero targets will be achieved.
Thanks, Michael. And of course, we actually have, the private sector represented and project developers here on the panel to kind of not just give their view on Nigeria specifically, but also more generally in terms of where are we heading together with Article 6, with international carbon markets. So maybe starting with you, Hannah, from Rabobank, Acorn, what opportunities and roles do you see for project developers in especially this time of convergence between voluntary and compliance and Article 6 markets?
Thanks, Bjorn. And actually, in our case, it's quite straightforward, right? The opportunity is as the market grows, there's more incentive for member states, but also private sector to really raise their ambition when it comes to their climate targets. And I think from a commercial perspective, we are a carbon market participant. We focus very much on agriculture, and we're also active in Nigeria. And we see that as the market grows, there's more opportunity for us to also participate in bilateral and multilateral arrangements. So we do see that if our ambition is to scale, that signals from Article 6 need to be there in order to create that environment for project developers to really forge ahead. And I think if I split your question into two, the role that we see is really sector specific. Michael has spoken about the agricultural sector. We are the largest food and ag bank in the world, being Rabobank. We focus on the carbon markets in the agricultural space. We already have a lot of lessons learned, and this is what we can do and what we are already doing together with the Nigerian delegation in exchanging best practices.
Thank you, Hannah. And Pedro, from your point of view, the same question, kind of what opportunities do you see in this maybe uncertain time to some extent, but hopefully we're moving in a positive direction?
Sure. Thank you, Bjorn. Well, I think from our perspective, just like Hannah made, splitting a bit into opportunities and roles, there's a lot of opportunities on the sense that we do need to reach 1.5 and the NDCs. There's a big gap to fulfill the NDCs. There's a lot of conditional targets on the NDCs that are not, there's a big finance gap, and that's the role that project developers, not project developers itself, but that project developers can get into and help countries to build their NDCs and achieve their NDCs. And then that's the role, coming to the role where project developers can come into play. Regardless of the fact that Article 6.2 is a government-to-government relation, someone needs to implement the projects. The projects are not making themselves automatically, right? So someone needs to implement, and this person implementing the project, this organization could be UNDP, could be private sector, could be even governmental officials. So there's the role, but considering the complexity of carbon markets, the methodologies and so on, we might be looking into specialized partners to deploy different technologies, even technological removals, NBS, agriculture, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things to be done, a lot of different technologies, a lot of different methodologies and project types.
And if I might ask you, Pedro, just as a follow-up, and maybe back to you, Hannah, then, we have seen the case of Nigeria, but as a project developer, what kind of clarity are you expecting from host countries? Because we see many diverging types of frameworks, of policies in engaging with carbon markets, not just Article 6, but also the voluntary market. We have share of proceeds, share of benefits. We have certain project types being allowed or not allowed, the domestic offsetting and crediting mechanisms moving forward. So really, what do you hope and expect to see from governments for you to be able to work effectively? Maybe starting with you.
Sure. We need certainty, right? As a project developer, whether we're talking about, let's say, Article 6.2 deals where we have a host country delivering credits at the ATMOs for a buying country, let's say Ghana and Switzerland, that was announced. Great, we have clarity over there. But let's say Corsia, for instance, where we might not, I mean, as a developer, we might be generating ITMOs in partnership with the host country, but we don't really know where those ITMOs are going to be placed. So if you want to develop a carbon project, which we need to remember all the time, it's a result-based payment. So within the carbon project, we already have a finance gap, because first we need to find money to implement the technology and then issue the carbon credits after we monitor and the activities implemented. So then we can sell or deliver to the countries and then get the money. So get the financial return. So in the end of the day, what we need is clarity, either from the host country, but also from the buying countries or Corsia. And I mean, here we can divide the challenges or maybe the barriers into two. I mean, we have local frameworks where we need certainty on the timing of the process. We need certainty on the fees or maybe the levies that are going to be charged in terms of the SOP or overall mitigation goals and other levies that are fair to be charged for the operation of the system that, as was mentioned here, is a lot of operation and a lot of management to be done. But also we need clarity on terms of the project types, right? So I mean, a lot of times we go to the country, we want to engage with the country, and the NDCs are not so detailed or so granular as buying countries would want. So it's not only about developing the project, but there's in some cases there are a lot of homework that needs to be done to build the country as the country's NDC and the country's ability and readiness to engage with carbon markets. But then we also have the UN uncertainties, right? So I mean, even if the host countries are willing to engage, even if the buying countries are willing to engage, how do you deal with pending issues of negotiation here? So as a private sector entity and trying to engage with this space, there are a lot of gaps that even if developers, host countries, and buying countries are willing to bridge, we're still facing a big risk here from the negotiation room, right? And here I can quote revocations, the agreed electronic format, the fees, so on and so forth. So even if everybody's aligned and trying to do and bridge all the gaps, we might still be facing some risks. But let's hope for a good outcome in Baku. Sorry if I took too long.
No, thanks, Pedro. And maybe we can come back to kind of the Article 6 negotiation uncertainties a little bit later. But Hannah, do you agree with comments by Pedro?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Pedro. And I think just to add on to that, like looking at the Nigerian example where they're developing their local legal framework, that's number one essential for us, right? Because what we see is if we want to deploy investments, so we're a financial institution, we're also very risk averse. And how do we protect against uncertainty is if there's clear rules and regulations on what we can and what we cannot do, and to get the proper recognition from the government. So how Nigeria has done it, where you have a national designated focal point on carbon markets, which is the NCCC. We regularly engage with them in a very open and transparent manner. They're able to issue letters that also for our investors are quite essential for them to be able to release those funds into our projects is absolutely crucial. And we've also participated in the consultation process of Nigeria, and we see this as an open way of including everyone's interest into the development of their legal framework, so that we don't run into situations where what's in place is just super unattractive for project developers, that we take our business somewhere else. So I think that's in a gist, my addition to Pedro's comments.
Thank you, Hannah. Turning to you, David, you represent Sweden, a buyer country and an active party in the Article 6 negotiations. You're representing Sweden in the negotiations itself. And well, Sweden has already committed funds, and you can explain how much, to actually procure ITMOs through various means and support project developments in host countries. So what are you looking for as a buyer when it comes to identifying host countries to work with, and any specific project criteria to ensure integrity in Article 6 transactions?
Yeah, so besides doing the negotiations here, I also work on the negotiations for 6.2 agreements bilaterally. And in addition to that, I also work on developing Sweden's own Article 6 framework. And so with those things in mind, I can address these two parts of the question. One is at the kind of country level what we're looking for, and the second of all, the project level. At the country level, I think it can be best summarized. I mean, there's a number of factors that we look at, and it's a lot less strategic than I'm going to make it sound, because oftentimes it depends on we get the right contact at the right time. That's the reality of how this works. But when we're sitting down and analyzing countries and comparing them and which we're going to focus on, because I can say before COP27, we were out searching for countries to work with. And then after COP27, it flipped and countries were coming to us and saying, hey, we want to do this. And so the question is, how do we sort through all of the different potential cooperations? And I think the three things are political will, integration, and institutionalization. Okay, political will. If we discover that a country is working at a technical level, they're interested in Article 6 at a technical level, that's not enough. Article 6 has enough requirements in terms of driving policy and institutional change that if there's not high-level political will, it's not going to happen. You have to get, the Foreign Ministry, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, you have to pull all these ministries together. And if the political will isn't there, someone's technical pet project is not going to be enough to drive the change necessary. So political will. Second, integration. A lot of countries are excited by the potential to contribute to their NDCs and, quite frankly, to bring in new revenue streams to their countries through Article 6. And that's great, but it's insufficient. A country needs to have thought about, how does Article 6 integrate with the country's other climate and social and economic development goals more broadly? It can't be an isolated thing. If, for example, you have not reasoned around, for example, Article 6, where does this fall in terms of our conditional versus unconditional NDC? If it's under the unconditional NDC, how do we deal with that? What categories, what sorts of projects are compatible with what we're doing as a host country? So integration, the second thing. And then the third thing is institutionalization. This is the degree, and this is wonderful to see that Nigeria has come so far in doing this. This is one of the criteria that we would look for, like how seriously are they taking this in terms of setting up a framework and implementing that framework? Do they know who needs to do what? Do they know who needs to authorize? Where's the MRV going to happen? Is there a central office for this? Or is it across different ministries? What level do we need to engage at if we're coming into a host country? So that's the third thing, I think. So those things: political will, integration, institutionalization. Second area, projects. So under the CDM, we had a project in Uganda that we'd done everything by the book. We had, been validated and verified. We jumped through all the hoops and done everything. Turns out that the stakeholder consultation that was performed was insufficient, and that it did not account for traditional land use claims on the same land that was going to be used for the project. This is several years ago. This blew up in Sweden. And of course, that's a bad thing that it happened. It was also extremely instructive for us because it forced us to reevaluate how we approach these projects. These are not simply about, carbon credits, whether under CDM or Article 6. We need to take an extensive look so that, it's a reputational risk for the Swedish government. It's a reputational risk more broadly for the success of Article 6 in general. I mean, I think Article 6 could withstand a number of bad projects. I'm not saying that, but if there's enough of those problems, it can bring the reputation and credibility of the whole system down. So as a result of that, with those eyeglasses on, both to protecting our own reputation, protecting the people who are affected by these projects, and also protecting the system as a whole, we have a pretty rigorous process. It's very, very intensive in terms of our own review. We do our own internal review with a bunch of experts. We have a consultant that comes in to help us to review these projects one by one. And then we have institutionalized in our regulations the process for receiving an authorization, which, besides getting the usual kind of validation and verification from actors we designate as providing a sufficient, certification process, we also require a sustainable development report from a list of reports that we designate that project developers submit. And this applies to both projects that Sweden itself is reviewing. We have 150 million US to acquire credits for Sweden to achieve its national targets. We're also going to make it possible for Swedish companies, for example, SBTI or other kind of voluntary initiatives, to also acquire credits through Article 6, regardless of which way it comes and what the purpose is. We will be using the Sustainable Development Reports to get a better sense of the risks involved, both in terms of sustainable development safeguards, but also on the co-benefit side as well. This is an express policy of the Swedish government that these should also contribute positively to sustainable development. And so those are the kind of ways that we're looking at that. This process works well now. It's extremely work intensive and expensive to do. We're looking at ways how we can scale this up. If we're suddenly getting 100 projects that IKEA wants to get in through Article 6 a year, we're going to have to look at how we do that. But we're not going to go back on these requirements that we have in terms of sustainable development safeguards and co-benefits, because we believe that by doing this, we can contribute to the development of the countries in which we're working. We can protect our own reputation as the Swedish government and the Swedish press, which is very sensitive to environmental and sustainable development issues, and then also promoting the integrity of the Article 6 system as a whole.
Thank you, David, for that overview. And of course, we are in Bonn. We are at the final days of the intersessional. We just received, hopefully, maybe final draft conclusion texts on 6.2 and 6.4 earlier today. Maybe starting with you, Michael. You're not a negotiator, but you are a host country. So how do you see, or what do you believe is still necessary from these negotiations to deliver on the promise of Article 6 and provide the necessary trust for you as a host country and also for market participants? And how do you see that we can move these issues ahead of Baku?
Right, I'm going to kind of segue into what the representative from Sweden had just said. I mean, and everyone else indeed. There needs to be some predictability, right? We've gone from Madrid to Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh to Dubai, and now we're here, right? So this whole idea of kicking the can down the road really at some point needs to complete. Getting the hands on explaining and coming to an agreement on what represents a transaction, what represents a valid Article 6 transaction, what represents monitoring, what represents verification, to really bring the integrity required, especially for host countries that are actually developing these projects and looking for investors to come in and invest into them. And so the mechanisms for achieving that is important as well, when combined to your expression of interest and in your framework as well. So when you have a target that is shifting, then it really makes it difficult to be able to come to an agreement in terms of what represents a mechanism that is acceptable across board. But that said, I think there's still an opportunity to be able to hear from the negotiations in terms of the other mechanisms around 6.4, 6.8, and of course the convergence between the voluntary carbon market and the compliance market. Really, for example, in Nigeria, we're seeing more and more VCM products requesting corresponding adjustment as part of their transaction. And that really speaks to the fact that the integrity of the credit itself is becoming really, really important, because it's really, to the points being made everywhere here, that's we want the integrity of the market to be protected. We want the investors to be protected. And once the core benefits that accrue to the local communities where these projects are being implemented to be protected as well. And so overall, getting a handle on the negotiations that really explains what the mechanisms will be for each of these different ones, as well as giving the opportunity for host countries to be able to codify some of these things in their own respective frameworks to be able to make it predictable for investors to come. We're looking for that amount of predictability.
Thanks, Michael. Hannah, you want to take this on from your point of view?
No, absolutely. We work with nature-based solution predominantly in the agroforestry sector. And so if I can use like a tree description of what's going on, sometimes negotiator could really forget the forest and just focus on the tree, which is what we're seeing right now. And I think this spirit of uncompromise is just going to make it more difficult to advance in Article 6 negotiations. I think by pushing for very risky language, and here I'm looking at revocation, for example, then we're not only not advancing, but almost like moving backwards, which is really unhealthy in a climate where we really need the signals for a robust and high integrity carbon market. I do see, how do we move forward, right? So I do think that multilateral negotiations will always have the roadblocks, but I do see countries like, Nigeria, like Sweden, Ghana, Singapore, that are figuring out 6.2. I totally understand from a member states' perspective, because there's so much scrutiny on the carbon markets that they don't want to get it wrong, but that's almost paralyzing them from even taking like baby steps towards, learning along the way. And so I really commend countries that are saying, okay, let's get some MOU signed, let's get an implementation agreement formalized, and then let's also learn not only, learnings from CDM, but also how does 6.2 work? How does the infrastructure for corresponding adjustments materialize and operationalize? But in the meantime, let's not get stuck on not doing anything.
Thanks, Hannah. David, I mean, you are one of the negotiators in the room. Well, right now you are in this room instead, so we're very happy that you're here. What do you think is needed to actually reach an agreement in Baku?
So when it comes to 6.2, as was noted, countries, including ourselves, are already moving forward on this. We feel we have enough to be moving forward. The big question on 6.2 is reporting. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have a bunch of countries that are moving forward in that direction. But if the reporting isn't in place, that's not going to stop the action. It's not stopping anyone. What it means is we're not going to know exactly what's going on in 6.2. We're not going to know the degree to which it's Paris aligned, the degree to which it's producing the promised benefits. The context of all this is that against the background of the past few years, the voluntary markets have shown it's really hard to get this right. It's really hard to know, does what we're selling exist and what are the qualities of what we're selling? Bjorn has heard me say this before. He knows my thoughts on this, but I think it's instructive to compare it to a mortgage derivative in ITMO. Okay, a mortgage derivative, you have like an underlying asset, house. There's a banker that makes a judgment of the risk of repayment on that house and issues a loan. And now looking back to the 2008 crisis and what precipitated it, you could have a collateralized debt obligation. You bundle a bunch of these mortgage loans together, and then you have someone that comes along and then could tie a derivative to that. So it's several steps of experts removed from the actual asset, meaning the asset is not something that can be easily evaluated by the consumer. They trust on expert intermediaries to determine the existence and the quality of the asset, right? And that's, the expert intermediaries failed in their assessment was what precipitated the 2008 crisis in part. Now, if you compare that to Article 6, this is a very similar asset. A mitigation outcome occurs somewhere out there. There's a validator, verifier, certifier goes in and looks at that, okay, we certify this, and an authorization by a government would also kind of certify that and say, this is real, we think it's additional, these are the characteristics of this. And now it's going to be sold to a third party. You might, in 6.4, you could have the UN coming in, putting their stamp of approval, but there's only a few hundred people in the world that really are equipped to evaluate the quality and existence of the underlying asset. What that implies is that if these 200 or 300 people that know how this works are not able to institutionalize rules at the UN sufficient to promote trust and make it so that people can rely, does this exist? Is it good? Then the market is going to fail further down the line. What you'll have is, I think the market's going to go for a few years if we get it wrong. let's say we get it wrong. We're not able to ensure transparency. We're not able to, consumers aren't able to judge the quality of the product. It'll go along for a few years, running on the steam of the UN's reputation. This UN system, we think it might be better than the voluntary markets because we think the UN might get it right, but we haven't, but they don't know that yet. In a few years, the Guardian reports are going to start coming in. Article 6 approved project has these problems. It's not additional, it doesn't contribute anything. Or the supervisory body approved the 6 project, and look what happened. When that happens, what's going to happen is that people are going to lose trust in the experts who have been entrusted to determine the existence and quality of the product. And at that point, I don't know if carbon markets, they'll still be around, but I don't know if they will, writ large, be viewed as a legitimate contributor to climate action if we have a second loss of faith. So from that perspective, I think that transparency is critical in the sense that it's not going to occur spontaneously because people don't know enough consumers don't know, not enough consumers know enough to be able to judge these products. So we need to, as UN intermediaries, get this right. And it doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be right enough that it's not going to cause us massive second loss of faith in the future. And I think it's constructive, the dialogue that's currently ongoing in negotiations. We have the potential to get a deal in Baku. Absolutely. Everyone's here to play. I don't think there's anyone here that's obstructing for obstructionism's sake. So I really think the potential is there. There are some important differences we need to get over, but we do have the potential for a good Baku deal. We'll see if we get there.
Thank you, David. I mean, that's hopeful to hear. We have, of course, from AITA, kind of representing the private sector, we've been following these negotiations for the last 10 years or so. And we are very happy to see that finally there is some constructive spirit in the room, but I think we are still scared that over the last 2 weeks, we have not really, or you as negotiators have not really been able to spend much time unpacking some of the controversial or difficult issues around authorizations, around how to address inconsistencies, for example, in reporting, sequencing, and the technical expert review, as well as the issue of registries, right? On 6.4 registry, the international registry under Article 6.2 and national registries that host parties have. Pedro, also turning to you, do you agree with David's point of view? Now, I don't want to put you against him, right? But are there other issues that you see would be important to have resolved leading up to Baku? What's your take?
Thank you, and I do agree with David. Huh? But I think that from speaking from the private sector, and trying to fit into Article 6 dimension, Article 6.2 here. For us, I think would be very important to have clarity on the timing and the procedures. So, a lot of time, when are we submitting initial reports? So how are we reporting that? And so, because again, the action is taking place, but as the action takes place, okay, great, we can discuss corresponding adjustment like revocation, like at a later stage eventually. But it's very important that, okay, a credit that is authorized today is not a credit that is adjusted. And this adjustment will not take place from one day to the other. It's something that will be happening throughout over up to 2 years eventually, like between the time of an activity and the submission of the ban and transparency report. So for me, I think it would be very important to have clarity on agreed electronic format and the timing of those submissions. And eventually, as we're talking about the integrity of the projects themselves, we have best case scenarios here with the Swiss, with the Swedish, but at the same time, we cannot forget that Article 6.2 is very open. So if actors or countries or parties that are willing to drop the ball or maybe not ensure the highest levels of integrity, we would need a strong technical review body. But at the same time, how do we cope with the spirit of the UN or the spirit of multilateral environmental agreements, right? That often the case, they have compliance systems that are much more facilitative than that providing sanctions. So, like the technical expert body might say, look, you got it wrong this time, but next time, let's do it right. But the ITMO is already rotating the market, it's already being traded. So I mean, but maybe the technical expert body could say, this is wrong, go back to the to the desk and redo everything. It would be a nightmare for a developer if we have a case like this, but looking ahead, that's maybe that's the police in the market that we would be looking for. What is the outcome? I don't know, and I'm trustful on, on David and other negotiators in the room, but that's what I would be very keen on and happy to see by the end of Baku.
Thanks, thanks, Pedro. And I want we have also not just a very distinguished panel, but a distinguished audience. So I want to give the chance to anyone in the audience who wants to ask any questions. Feel free to raise your hand, and I think we should have a running mic. If you need some more time, then I will continue my. Okay, we have one question. Do we have? Where is Lisa? We have people online. Is there a mic in the back? Running mic in the front?
Oh, there's one on the side here.
Yeah, Fabio, please, if you can send this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please state your name and where you come from and your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talks. My name is Arad. I study environmental management and policy in Lund University in Sweden. I've got two questions. First one is short, but maybe it's a long answer. And is that if now I walk in the streets of Lagos and ask people, are you happy with the new carbon policy that Nigeria is taking place, is adopting? What would be the answer? And my second question goes to David and Hannah. That I know that my son is Sweden. I know that we do care about transparency, but when it comes to like working with countries, like I also come from Iran, that maybe transparency or not that much. I mean, we really need that. Would you give me some tangible examples that what do you do to make sure that the reports you are receiving are correct, and how do you do the due diligence to make sure that everything is that has been claimed like is valid? And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions, just to maybe pull together a few? Yes.
Hello, my name is Kasim Jamjua. I'm a manager from EKI. We work on sustainability as well. We are, I think, the largest seller of carbon credits. And that brings my question as well. This is pretty much for everyone, since you're all working on policies, but the voluntary carbon market has been suffering for the last 2 years very much. And for someone who is was selling carbon credits, we have been seeing a fall in the market. And there have been a lot of promises, such as the core carbon principles that will enhance the market. But where do you see is the market going? And do you think that we will get back to where the market was 2 years ago?
Thank you. Thank you. Easy and difficult question. Michael, do you want to start from your perspective?
Right. So you were asking if I'm happy with what's the framework where we've evolved, and also the people. So largely, if you saw the picture that was put up by Johan earlier on, in terms of the participation from all sector of people, you would really easily see that there's a lot of interest. People are really waiting for government. So basically, government's playing catch up. So one, there's enough enthusiasm in the room to really bring this alive. But with respect to what's happening on the streets of Lagos and Abuja and elsewhere, I think there's a general excitement about what carbon market could potentially do for helping to transform the economy, bringing in those resources to help, provide on-ground intervention for some of these important gaps that we have in our energy systems, in transportation, in waste, and what have you. But that's not sufficient. What will make it sufficient is if you out there, the buyers, equally have confidence in what we have put out to say, this is how we're going to engage. Do you trust, or do you have enough information to be able to make the judgment that, okay, yes, I can participate in this market? And that's exactly what we're trying to evolve. Some of the features that's been mentioned here in terms of making sure that we have SDG, features that really addresses environmental integrity, as well as our providing enough safeguards to ensure that the methodologies, the mechanisms for generating those credits, follow very strict, standards that meets the requirements of whatever country or whatever entity is purchasing entity. And so that's important. I believe the framework we have in place, first of all, there's enough excitement in the system. They're waiting for it. So that keeps me awake at night, excitedly. Two, I think there's enough also appetite for those sort of transactions in Nigeria. But we also want to make sure that the investors coming in also have enough, they see enough in that framework to give them enough confidence to be able to come in. And I'm hoping that you can tell me.
Thank you. David, do you want to address the question on transparency, I guess? And maybe if you also want to add something on kind of Article 6, ICVCM, core carbon principles, and quality discussion.
Sure. So it depends what reports you're talking about. I assume you're talking about the ones related to specific projects, or are you talking about the higher level reporting to the UN? Specific project, okay. Well, one thing that's going on that I think is a strength of the 6.2 system is that you have two countries, two eyes looking at the same projects, actually. And I think that helps. It's not just Sweden looking at this and having our own due diligence processes, our own, looking under the hood and seeing what kind of company is this that we're working with and what track record do they have. That's all very important too, but the host country, we have a signed agreement with Ghana. Ghana has a robust Article 6 framework that's working really well, and they're going to be doing the same thing. We coordinate between us regularly to talk about projects and what's going on, and we are going to be syncing. We do separate, reviews and evaluations, but we're syncing up to make sure we're getting the same results and that we're looking at the same thing. And I think that's a strength of Article 6.2 is you have two parties that are invested in looking at this together. And so that's, I think, one way to do that. About the overall trends in the market, I do not think this is a deterministic situation. I don't think it's bound to go one way or the other. I think it's very much incumbent, partly on Article 6, partly on the efforts going on in the voluntary market to prove that we can provide better standards. And I'm not sure if we can yet. It is an open question. Can the UN deliver? That remains to be seen in Baku, in Belém. We will see what happens. Hold us to account on that, because there's no guarantee it's going to be, just because we get something passed doesn't mean it's going to be good, okay? I think this is a critical juncture right now in carbon markets, both voluntary, Article 6 compliance, whatever. In general, I think this is a critical juncture. So we need to follow up to see if the promised improvements, which are occurring in the voluntary market right now, and which we're trying to do in Article 6, live up to their promise, because there is no guarantee. I hope they will. They can, and we can get it right. It remains to be seen if it delivers.
Thank you. Pedro and Hannah, do you want to add anything, maybe especially on the quality concerns or trends in the voluntary market, and where do you see standards and projects moving forward? I saw Hannah first.
Oh, sorry. No, yeah, just to answer your question. So I do think that there is quite a lot of scrutiny in the carbon markets right now, and there's actually quite a lot of distrust. Do I think we will move away from that? Not necessarily. Is it good for the market, for people to be less skeptical about it? I don't think so either. So I think that there is a level of quality and scrutiny that the public needs to put pressure on project developers like us, so that we continually improve our processes, enhance transparency, enhance accountability towards not only our buyers, but to the public. Because ultimately, if we're saying that carbon credits deliver climate results, I hope that people are looking behind my shoulder and telling me what I'm doing wrong and what I'm doing that's good, And so I do think that that level of scrutiny and oversight from the media will continue to exist. I do think that we can take steps, as speaking from the voluntary carbon market side, to adhere to CCP to core carbon principles, to either align with ICVCM or the VCMI in order to ensure that there's at least some sort of standards that we're following. But in the absence of like a uniform way of us adhering to a set of standards that's also on a voluntary basis, that we're going to try to improve ourselves. So that's my very long-winded answer to your question. And to your concern. So we're project-based, right? So we're a carbon program. And again, for us, transparency is super important. So because we work with smallholder farmers that implement agroforestry systems on a plot level, we ensure that the general public, you all included, can go to our website and see who bought what from whom. And we include, like, even on a plot level, what those polygons are, so that, you know, there is some sort of checks and balances that you haven't sold those credits twice, for example. Now, on top of that, we also work with Plan Vivo. You can't just sell credits in an open market. You need to be certified. There needs to be some sort of oversight from a certifier. And above that, we also have some sort of verification and monitoring that occurs for our projects to ensure that, well, the communities are receiving the benefit share that we promised to them, but also that, yeah, those trees actually exist in those plots where we're selling.
Thank you, Hannah. Do you want to add something to that, Pedro?
Yeah, I'll be very brief, but just to answer like the question about the monitoring and transparency, I think different project types will demand different engagement. So I mean, NBS and agroforestry or agricultural projects are much more complicated to monitor. Also cook stoves than, let's say, a landfill gas, where the methane is coming out, you measure, you certify, and voila, we have the emission reduction, right? That's why some developers prefer metered methodologies than NBS and other ones. And also we have digitalization, right? So I mean, we have satellite imagery and other things that could ensure a bit more transparency, regardless of human error, let's put it that way. Coming to the question of like whether the market will come back to where it was 2 years ago, I hope not. I really hope not, because we had a lot of problems on the supply side and on the demand side. I think, like you mentioned, CCP, there's like a VCMI and other initiatives that are trying to address these risks, right? But more than only looking at ensuring integrity, like on the supply side and the demand side, I think that voluntary market in the past was missing a big puzzle, with a big piece on the puzzle, which is the government. So even if we're talking about voluntary market, the projects and the initiatives should be aligned with the governmental policies, right? So I mean, I'm not talking about here that voluntary market should be channeling money on conditional NDCs, but maybe on the unconditional sides, or maybe on aspects that are outside the NDCs. So, but in any case, governmental engagement is very important, because in the end of the day, if you don't have the political buy-in, or even maybe the legal buy-in from the government that we're developing your projects, you might have a big problem, right? I mean, we saw what happened in Brazil last week. As a Brazilian, I'm very comfortable about speaking about my country. The federal police jailed some people because they were developing REDD+ projects inside public lands. And just to say one case, right? We have the other case in Indonesia as well. So, I mean, having the government close to you, I mean, there's the cliche, you know, like you keep your friends closer and your enemies even closer. And I think that the government here is to be seen as your friend and your partner, and it needs to be with you. But if you don't engage with him, with the government, it might become your enemy, right? So, I mean, as a developer, you need to ensure integrity on those manners. But I'll stop here.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Pedro, and thank you to everyone on the panel. I think we need to close. We have a closing remarks. So warm hands to all of the panelists. Thank you also for the questions. And you're welcome to step down. And I would like to hand over to Diana Khan. You are the program manager at the Article 6 Implementation Partnership Center based in Japan. We are very honored and grateful to partner as AITA with the Article 6 Implementation Partnership, especially in setting up the private sector working group. And so please, over to you for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bjorn. So it's been a pleasure to hear from such a distinguished panel and to engage in fruitful discussions on the vital role of Article 6 in facilitating climate action and the energy transition. So as we look towards COP29 in Baku, several key themes and next steps have emerged from today's discussions. Using Nigeria as a case example, we have seen how international carbon markets can support low carbon development and the clean energy transition. So the collaboration between the government and the private sector in Nigeria showcases the tangible benefits that Article 6 can bring to local communities and national NDC achievement. While negotiations on Article 6 stalled at COP28, it's clear that the implementation is progressing. So we must continue to build on this momentum, ensuring that the finalization of Article 6 rules incorporates the lessons learned from ongoing projects. So this will enhance transparency, reduce risks, and provide a robust framework for future climate actions. So the private sector's involvement is crucial in developing projects on the ground. We've heard about the challenges such as authorization frameworks and the risks of revocation, but also about the opportunities for public and private partnerships. So the private sector's engagement drives innovation and implementation, as seen in examples like Guyana, where private initiatives are leading the way. Looking ahead, carbon markets will play a pivotal role in inclusive low carbon development. The integration of independent crediting programs such as ICVCM, CCPs, the 6.4 mechanism, and domestic carbon market developments will be key of scaling up climate finance. Article 6 will be an essential tool in mobilizing both public and private finance, enhancing transparency, and supporting the NDC updates and BTR submissions. So climate finance, including public finance and quantitative private finance, remains a critical component of the energy transition. Article 6 mechanisms will be instrumental in mobilizing the necessary funds, ensuring the climate actions are adequately supported and the benefits reach those most in need. Countries like Guyana provide valuable lessons on how private sector engagement can drive implementation. These examples should inspire other nations to foster similar collaborations, ensuring that Article 6 rules are effectively implemented. Other early mover countries like Ghana, Vanuatu, Thailand, Suriname, who have submitted initial reports, also offer important insights. So in addition to energy, recent discussions have highlighted the importance of diversifying mitigation activities, projects in water sector, and the role of agriculture, forestry, and other land use, as well as jurisdictional REDD+ initiatives by countries like Guyana, demonstrate the wide-ranging applications of Article 6 mechanisms. So as we prepare for COP29, our focus should be on finalizing the Article 6 rules and ensuring their effective implementation. We must continue to showcase successful projects, engage with both public and private sector stakeholders, and promote transparency in reporting and financing mechanisms. So in conclusion, today's discussions have reinforced the critical importance of Article 6 in advancing the energy transition and achieving our climate goals. So by working together, governments, private sector, and civil society, we can ensure that Article 6 becomes a powerful tool for climate action, driving progress and delivering tangible benefits on the ground. So thank you all once again for our moderator, panelists, and audience for your contributions. Let's look forward to continuing this important work in the lead up to COP29 in Baku. Thank you.